Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I'm Jenna Kirsten, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'd like to welcome everyone to our session today on HITRUST, and we're going to be talking about management responsibilities. Just a few things to go over before we dive into our discussion today. All attendees will be muted throughout the session, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature located in the WebEx toolbar. I'll monitor those throughout the hour, and we'll have some time reserved at the end to answer those. This session is also being recorded, and all attendees will receive a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides in your inbox tomorrow. All attendees will also be receiving 1 CCB CEU credit, so look for those from us in your inbox yet this week. Just a little bit of background about who we are before we get started. Kirkpatrick Price is a licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to clients worldwide. Our firm has over 13 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer both regulatory compliance and information security services. We provide consulting services such as policy and procedure drafting, risk assessment, internal audit plan and development, and readiness audits. We also provide guidance and audit services on frameworks such as SOC 1 and SOC 2, SOC for cybersecurity, PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST, FISMA, ISO, and GDPR. We also encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog, visiting our library of recorded webinars. You can catch up on any series at any time, or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Now I'd like to welcome our speaker for today, Shannon Lane. Shannon is a lead practitioner here at Kirkpatrick Price. He's also on the 2018 HITRUST CSF Assessor Council and holds all the certifications that you see below. Welcome, Shannon.
Hi there, folks. It's a pleasure to have a chance to speak with all of you today. This is our, what is it, Jenna, our third in this series, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm getting excited. This is getting more and more interesting. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit more about some nuts and bolts and a little bit less about some high-level topics. We want to get into governance, and it's time to start talking about things that we see when we go out for various HITRUST assessments, places where people have trouble and issues along the way. To that end, especially because we're going to be talking about governance today, remember that I am not a lawyer. And anything that Jenna or I say over the course of this presentation shouldn't be construed as legal advice. We're here to inform you. We're here to teach as best we can. But if you do need legal or regulatory advice, make sure you speak with your attorney. Counsel's always better about that than a bunch of auditors. Today, we're going to talk about a very narrow piece of the HITRUST CSF. We're going to talk about the executive charter. We're going to talk about the ISMP, or the Information Security Management Program, at least at a very high level. And we're going to talk about how HITRUST approaches these items and why they seem to present such a difficulty during most assessments. This is something that, in my opinion, we should have. They should already be part of our governance structure. Everyone who is attempting a HITRUST certification in general, has to have incredibly detailed policies and procedures to pass the HITRUST scoring and rubric. But often, the executive charter falls short of HITRUST expectations, despite the fact that we spend all of that time on policy and procedure. That's our goal today. We want to get through that and point out why that one simple document can cause such tremendous difficulty. We begin by discussing what an executive charter is. Everybody's familiar with the concept of policy, procedure, standard. These are how we build any sort of program within an environment. A charter is a policy specifically designed to empower a particular activity within the organization. You have, for example, an executive management charter that's part of core company documentation that's handed down by the board. The executive management in turn charters HR, and they charter operational management by delegating those powers and those roles away from themselves and to the managers that are going to be running each one of those departments. The executive charter, generally speaking, details the parameters under which a department will run. It answers the core question, that in our opinion, as an audit firm, is the most difficult question to answer in any assessment: is your senior management involved with information security? Now, that's not just a HITRUST question. That crosses into ISO, SOC 2, NIST 800 series questions. Everybody asks that. Is senior management involved? Are they interested? Do they devote time, effort, and energy to making sure that the information security program is both monitored and running as they intend? So to that end, the charter stands up for the second piece of that. What does senior management intend to do with the program that we're placing out into the world? When I say it is a small portion of the CSF assessment, if you are a smaller organization, it will touch only 6 requirement statements directly. Now, it touches a bunch of them indirectly, of course. You can't have an information security program without having a charter to charter it, and that program is going to have policies and procedures that have ramifications throughout the assessment. But in terms of a direct assessment piece, there are only 6 requirement statements where it has a direct effect. But when I say it is commonly missed and difficult to remediate, this is the one where we often struggle until the very last minute. Very specifically, the pieces of an executive charter: document, statement of direction by senior management, we mentioned that. They set your parameters for operation. Where does information security begin and end? It defines responsibilities. Who's in charge? Who has the delegated responsibilities? And what things can they delegate past themselves? And it acts as the primary control for accountability of the entire department within the organization. Let me stress that again. Without an executive charter, you do not have any accountability beyond the C-suite. You may be a director of information security, but without having that power granted to you by the CEO, you really may not have any teeth to do the work that you do, and it's difficult to hold you or the people that you're trying to hold accountable for security activity. The executive charter enables the entire security structure of your organization to operate. It grants rights and responsibilities, and not just power, to the department or the project. It creates a baseline accountability structure. How do we report back that we are achieving the goals that are being set for us? And it's built into foundational documentation. It's so foundational, in fact, that it even drives creation of your org chart. It sets aside who does what at each level. So the next question becomes, what's specific about a charter that goes to the ISMP? Now, as part of what Jenna's going to send out to you all at the end of this, I'm going to include a sample, very much basic executive charter. You'll find that a true executive charter only consists of maybe 2 paragraphs that are required to be there. The rest is organization specific. But in those 2 paragraphs, we have to do a bunch of things. We define how the CISO and information security department is structured. We empower the CISO specifically with what he needs to do his work. We establish who the CISO or ISO reports to within the organization. Now, that's a reiteration. I have now said that 3 times in having this conversation, and I can't stress enough how important it actually is. A CISO doesn't fall into the traditional roles of the C-suite. It is an extended C-suite officer. And many organizations have an ISO instead of a CISO. They're not exactly a chief information security officer. They're an ISO that reports to the CTO within an organization. So it's very important that every organization define their CISO or ISO role in terms of their own corporate structure. There isn't anything predefined out there that stands up to legal scrutiny. You have to define it yourself. It tells us who it reports to so that we can establish operational independence. If your information security officer reports to the director of IT, and it's a sub-department of IT, then it can be very, very difficult to say that your security program is independent of the very people it's supposed to watch and manage. On the other hand, if it reports directly to the CEO, they may report technical details that the CEO is utterly uninterested in reading about and probably may not be a subject matter expert in to make an informed decision. Rather, often the ISO reports to the office of the CTO or the CFO, and then additionally reports to the CEO as decisions are made. Where an organization has a full CISO department that is a peer level to all of the other C-suite officers, but often has a great many constraints between the CFO, the CTO, the CIO, whatever those other roles are within the organization, and how they interact with each department needs to be fully defined. The CISO should never have the power, for example, to shut down a business, but he should have the power to sign off on initiatives and stop them if they're not going the direction that he needs them to go to make sure that what you're doing is secure. Further, that charter should empower that ISO role to set appropriate policies to whatever your CEO is comfortable in inside of the information security environment. I can't stress enough how important it is to have someone who is a subject matter expert assisting you on defining your security policies. Those policies govern everything that you do. We all know how important they actually are and can be. They also need to reflect the character and culture of your organization, and security needs to fit within that bubble. One of the great complaints we hear when we walk in and we do a policy and procedure project with a client is often the client will look at us and go, we're going to put all of this in paper and we're going to lose our agility, or everybody's going to get mad. They have to sign off on all this stuff. We've never had to do it like this before, and if we do it like this now, I'm going to have people leaving. Everybody's going to be angry with me. But good policy, good procedures, good documentation written by the right people in the right places with the organization actually needs to align with that culture. It needs to push you in the right direction while doing so in such a way that employees understand why they're participating in that activity, and it doesn't interfere with the reasons people come to the office in the morning. The charter is also going to empower the team within the whole of the structure. Anecdotally, we have had clients where the security team is built, we have an ISO, they put all of these things in place, and then when one of their security policies is breached and they raise that, they literally do not have the power to enforce the policies that they have written. And if I have to point to any one failure in the executive charter that really drives failures in HITRUST, it's that. Disciplinary policies are one thing, but also the ability to simply put a halt to a project if it needs to, if it's being handled inappropriately, to step in and change course when things are not really protecting data the way that you need to, that are exposing you to risk or liability. That power is very important. And it's not the power to say no, it's the power to say yes, but. I'm glad we're doing this, but we need to do this in a different way. Here's the hurdles we need to jump through to make sure that when we do this thing, we don't expose ourselves to additional risk. Without the power to say that, even to the CEO on company initiatives, then your information security department is performing nothing. They're not actually able to do what they are chartered to do, which is to reduce the overall organizational risk. And finally, it also defines the limits of that the information security team's operation. We don't want the information security team to be able to run outside of their boundaries either. It's always a collaborative effort. Security is never unilateral. So to that end, it should be fairly difficult for the information security team to address existing and going concerns and make dramatic changes without the input of those teams as well. Business is about collaboration. That's why we build companies and not monarchies. And it's about getting all of your team to move together in the same direction. So the information security team cannot be allowed to run off by itself. Now, again, I'll be supplying you guys with some basic templates for an executive charter for a security program. They are only a couple of paragraphs long, but they'll give you an idea of what exactly it is that you need to see, what needs to be addressed. They do represent a very bare minimum charter. Those charters will need to be addressed with your organizational need and requirements and what you all need to get out of that information security program. When those templates come to you following this presentation, be sure to understand that they're still a long way from deployable. What I want to do is give you the checklist of all of the things that you need to hit and sort of a template to build that in. To that end, instead of giving you the templates in today's presentation, what I wanted to show you was what HITRUST does. What we saw before was what a general executive charter should contain and how a charter narrows down to the ISMP. HITRUST says that there are several specific things that you need to do to make your program fit with the HITRUST protocol. You have to ensure the effectiveness of the program through program oversight. You have to establish in communication organizational priorities for organizational missions, objectives, and activities. You have to have regular review and update to the security plan that has to be defined in your charter. The charter should give a methodology to ensure compliance with your overall plan by the rest of the workforce. This usually falls into training and internal audit activity. And you have to figure out how you intend to evaluate and accept security risk on behalf of the organization, which is empowering your ISO to design your risk assessment and risk management process. These 5 points represent all of the requirement statements that we're going to touch on here in a second that HITRUST needs you to get to pass the bar of certification. If you can do these 5 things, which are all governed and established by your charter, then you'll make it. In general, we find that 2 or 3 of these are missing in almost every engagement we go on. Most of the time, what's missing is the idea of internal audit and ensuring your own compliance. We also don't usually see prioritization. What is it that the Information Security Department is actually intended to do? We know it exists and we know it does security, but how do we define that as a successful mission within the organization? How do you set a KPI, a key performance indicator, around the Information Security Department actually doing what they're doing? That's what your charter establishes it. And those are the things that are most often missed. Now, HITRUST has specific requirement statements. These requirement statements, the 3 biggest ones are pulled in here. A senior level information security official is appointed and responsible for ensuring security processes are in place, communicated across the organization, and consider and address organizational requirements. This is the core function of that charter. We're going to say who does it, what they do, what exactly they're responsible for, how that they have the responsibility to make sure everybody understands it, and they are empowered to make sure the things that you dream of doing can be done successfully. Most information security charters we interact with say we're going to have an information security policy, and here's our policy, and we put some roles in, and those people are going to be responsible for security, and it stops. It doesn't do all of those pieces. It doesn't speak to ensuring that they're there, communicating it to everyone. It definitely doesn't bring in what the CEO's vision for the company is and make sure that it addresses the requirements of that vision. Another direct requirement statement, HITRUST language. The owner of the security policies has management's approval and is assigned the responsibility to develop, review, and update and approve policies. The one that's often missing here is development of policy. Review and update and approval is often covered by the information security policy itself. Often that process has been well codified. But the actual process of developing new policies for the organization beyond the original set that the information security officer inherits is often not delegated. And it's something that we catch quite often. Now, the annual review is, of course, a requirement, but remember that program review is always ongoing. And as you move up in the requirements tree within HITRUST, you'll discover that, that the requirements themselves grow more strict about more constant review and update of policy, making sure that things change exactly when needed and not just once a year as you guys approach policy sets. So if your organization is complex or deals with a lot of data, managing a great number of records where you move up into the higher levels, make sure that you remember the program is going to be more strict than annual for constant policy development and review and update. And the last one is interesting because the policies often delegate responsibility for policy management, but not often for managing the security itself. So an individual or dedicated team is assigned to manage the information security of your people. Not just your systems, although your systems take a part in that. But also the individuals that are present within your organization, their activities, how they work, what they do, how they interact with your systems, whether or not they're following your acceptable use procedures, and whether systems are operating as they're intended to make sure everybody is operating in a secure fashion. Now, that seems like a small thing, and I know it feels like I'm harping on the same small set of topics. But I wanted to bring this out as a very specific webinar, as something that we could all sit around and talk about for a minute, so that you understand that the charter literally drives your entire organization's security posture. For such a simple document, for such a tiny thing, 2 paragraphs at its very basic, usually no more than 2 pages, including everything, revision histories and approvals and all the other things that need to go into policy. For such a simple document, it causes more trouble for engagement than anything else we go out and engage with. CEOs, especially in smaller or starter organizations, don't often think about the requirements to empower. Even when the organization is more robust and mature, we often miss all of the things we do need to empower. And many, many times we miss small parts that cause failures in several requirement statements that roll underneath that. So I think it very, very important to stress that this little 2-page document will drive a surprising amount of your organizational infrastructure. And finally, the big thing I want to point out to you all is this. Management's commitment to information security is always measured, always, at its base by the comprehensiveness of the charter and in the empowering of those people who are running your information security program to ensure that everyone, from the top to the bottom of the organization, abides by the organization's own rules. When I tell you that the charter sets a roadmap for this, I'm not kidding. Things like, how do you manage a lost badge? If you charge $5 for that badge and they have to go through HR to get it, the CEO can't be exempt from that policy. And those exemptions, when they show up in internal audit, should result in disciplinary action just like it would for anyone else. It doesn't matter who breaks your security. It doesn't matter how that security gets broken. Somewhere along the way, when it's found, it needs to be managed. And the people who do that need the power and the capability to make sure that it's done. This little 2-page document results in more audit failures of all types than any other policy and procedure that you will encounter in an organization. And I hope that what I'm doing today in this short webinar we're going to have is that I want you to go back and look at your policies and procedures. I want you to go find that document, not the one that says, oh, we're going to have an information security policy and it's going to be reviewed annually. No, I want you to find the one that empowers your people, that says, yes, we're going to handle security. We're going to manage our risk. And here are the people that are going to lead us in that effort. That's the document you need to have. And I always encourage people to actually make that a separate document. Something very specific. This is something that only your CEO can approve anyway. It needs to be something separate and specific that sets out the guidance for the entire organization about how you're going to engage with information security. And if you've never considered that as an organization, if you dove into this project, starting by writing policies, going to SANS and pulling down policy templates and going forward, then this is not an exercise that you have ever done. And it has ramifications across the whole organization, just like the appointment of a CFO does, or the definition of a CTO's role within a space. So keep that in mind. This document matters in a way that many other policy documents are formalities and matter only because we need to write down what we do. This one matters at a fundamental level within your organization. So I warned Jenna that we would be a little bit short today, that I wanted to talk about one specific small topic. And I would encourage you guys to take a minute and reach out with some questions and all on this particular one. I know that I harped, but if there's anything I can clarify, please let me do so. While you guys are thinking through that or post any questions you may have, just as a reminder, I will be sending out a basic policy template to go with this particular item, maybe a little bit later than normal for you all getting the slides and the links to them. I want to make sure that it's pretty, so it's going through the writers before it goes out of the door. And that particular policy template is not a full-on policy. You can't just sign it and go forward. But what it does have is very specific language to help guide you in empowering your own department. And once you get that template, I encourage you to go find those pieces in your own, regardless of what your language is, regardless of how your policies are written, and see if you can track down those individual pieces. And if you can't, take a day or two and see if you can get it all written out and signed. See if you can make that definition. And make sure that the right people are doing the right things inside of your organization. So with that in mind, do we have any questions?
Shannon, could you touch on how, I know you did a little bit, but just how this charter kind of impacts across other frameworks and disciplines? Oh,
yes, absolutely. I'll go for 3 very, very specific ones, examples. But understand that in information security, one of the jokes we have is that there's nothing new under the sun. It's all different ways of looking at the same set of controls. For SOC 2, there is a specific AICPA requirement that requires us as auditors to evaluate management's involvement and corporate structure as part of information security. The charter speaks directly to that. The NIST 800 series has several controls that talk about delegation of authority, regular activity being monitored by appropriate personnel and subject matter experts, and people being empowered to perform their role. Those are present throughout that framework. Another thing that you're going to find is that ISO turns around and talks a great deal about sanctions policies. You see, in ISO, where everything, they want to get you to managed levels, it's all about best practice. They want the ability to have kind of a punitive measure when things go wrong, and they want to see that you're measuring things to make sure that you know when things go wrong. Again, it cuts throughout the entire framework, and it requires that you have at least some level of internal audit and responsiveness that equates to operational audit work, that equates to validation by policy experts or subject matter experts within your organization for each thing. And the Information Security Charter empowers someone to bring all of that together and make sure it's all functioning in one coherent whole. HIPAA has requirements for breach reporting that can often be addressed by a charter, though it's not a direct requirement there. But since HIPAA's security rule is based on NIST, CMS audits often reach out, and one of the first things they ask you for is your charter and your policy documentation.
Great. Another question, let's say, that doesn't really go along the lines with an executive charter exactly, but, if you're someone that's on an IT team or in your information security department and you are making the case to get a HITRUST assessment to some management, to C-level executives, what would your kind of pitch be to get a HITRUST assessment?
What I would look at people and say is that HITRUST holds you to a certain risk model. And I'm going to do this very poorly, folks. I am not a salesperson. What I would tell you to say is something along the lines of this. HITRUST isn't just a certification. Getting the HITRUST certification and maintaining it over a long period means that you're going to commit to the HITRUST framework to drive your organization's information security practice. So the first thing you get is an external authority to help you understand what to do to become secure. We all know the basics, but the nuance often gets lost, especially in the heat of the moment or when we're under pressure or when things have gone wrong. And the CSF can help point you in the right direction and keep you on the right road. The second thing on that is it allows you to test your security against a known standard, which I think is incredibly important. As an auditor, not as you guys out in the business world who have to be audited by me, the thing that I think is most valuable about the reports is not whether you pass or fail, but rather that somebody came along and said, hey, this thing isn't working the way that you think it is. Hey, you've missed a primary risk in your organization. Or, hey, maybe these controls aren't appropriate to the risk that you guys have put together. Those are powerful statements. And the HITRUST certification requires regular review to make sure that you're not slipping or going the wrong direction, or those new risks that you found next week are going to be covered by your program as a whole. To me, that says a lot about your regulatory compliance and your commitment to overall security. And then, of course, there's the third piece. Any framework, any requirement, any reporting that you do does help in the sales process and does help show other people outside of your organization that you are, in fact, compliant. And a HITRUST certification is often one of those things that, due to its nature, as it becomes accepted in the marketplace, is just simply accepted. There's no report. You don't have to reveal your internal controls unless you wish to. You simply say, I am certified, and a lot of people take it at that. They're all powerful.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. Another question is this executive document a summary of the information covered in a standard operation procedures document?
No, it really isn't. Your SOPs really are just that. Those are your procedures that you guys are going to be doing on a daily basis to affect your program. This is, how do I install antivirus? How do we do our daily scans? How do we report those scans back? Things like, hey, where does my SIEM report? When we set up a new computer, what are the steps that we're going to take to do that? These things fall into your SOPs from an auditor's perspective. Now, a lot of companies extend SOPs to include some policy requirements, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the charter is the document from your C-suite that empowers you to even have those SOPs and give them teeth in the first place. At its core, and I probably should have put a slide in for this, so I'll do that for the next time we do this presentation. At its core, it says, we will have an information security department. It will be devoted to security and the management of risk across our entire organization. That department will be a peer to the C-suite, if that is a CISO, or will be managed by the CTO, if it is an ISO. They will functionally report in this way. This person, the ISO, the CISO, will be empowered to write and manage security considerations and policies through all of our company endeavors, and will be included in decision-making and any decision-making that partakes of corporate risk. I keep saying it's a very simple document, and it is. But that's what we want to do, is we want to give your SOPs and your policy documents, your people, your activities, teeth. And good teeth. A lot of times, and the great failure, speaking anecdotally and some of the things I've seen even in some of my recent audits that I've gone out and done, most of the time the teeth are there but not sharp enough. They'll hit the poor guy working the desk job at the back end of the office, but they don't hit management, and they don't hit the C-suite, and they don't hit things like conversations with clients, and we don't really level them against our third parties the way that we need to. And the information security guy often gets cut out of conversations that are incredibly important for him to participate in. When you're going for a new initiative and you're onboarding a new client, security should be there. Not to tell you no, but rather to help you do it in a secure fashion. When you're building a new project, they need to be there, not the last one brought to the table to make sure to vet your idea, at the 30 seconds before we're launching, day before midnight mark, but rather to be there from the beginning to help you build it in a secure fashion. It's cheaper to do it that way, and it's better for all concerned. The charter gives you that teeth. The charter says, hey, sales guy that just dropped a contract on my desk, you didn't cover, you've actually redlined out a whole bunch of things that go straight to security. No, we can't do that. It's business that adds risk to our organization. It can go to the C-suite and say, I love your vision. I love where you want to go. Here are the extra things we need to do to make sure that crossing those thresholds doesn't cause any damage to what we're building here. Without that document, your SOPs have meaning, but they're only internal to your department. If you find an intrusion in the system, you can deal with that. But how easy is it for your security professional to deal with something like your CFO going rogue? We hope that never happens. We often trust our executive officers, but remember the CISO's job is to accurately assess risk and reduce the company's overall risk profile, to get it down to where the thing you do is not going to tear everyone else up. And so they're the watchdog inside of the house, and they need the power to be that watchdog, along with everything else they do that's positive to your organization.
Great. Another question for HITRUST first-timers. We've talked about the charter, but what other, what's the level of involvement of management or an executive team in a HITRUST assessment, first time or, continuing compliance?
Surprisingly high. Now, by that I mean executive management should be involved in company operations, and since HITRUST touches on the security of all company operations, they're of course going to be dragged in, but they get dragged in at the policy level. So a lot of times the C-suite, the CEO, for example, in every audit we do gets interviewed for about 30 or 40 minutes. They're questions we just need to ask them that really can't be asked to anybody else in the organization. And for most, let's call it 100-man or larger companies where the CEO doesn't have 30 hats, where they get to be a CEO, in that particular case, their involvement is very, very minimal. They'll be very peripheral to the whole thing because all of their vision, all of what they want, all of what they've established should be expressed in policy. So I like to say, we're not going to knock down your CEO's door and they don't have to sit at the table all week. However, their involvement is going to be way before we ever walked in with all of the policies that they've approved and everything they've read. As a side comment to that, and just because we run into it a lot, one of the questions that we sneakily ask your C-suite officers during an audit, we're going to ask them about their own policies. And it is very, very damaging to your audit if your auditor comes in and asks questions like, "Oh yeah, I see your CFO told me that you took a trip to DEF CON last year. Did you use that new laptop like your policy says, where you're supposed to take a separate laptop?" And they go, "What?" If your C-suite is signing off on policies that they haven't read, that can be very, very dangerous to your audit. So kind of keep that in mind. The C-suite's vision should be expressed in policy, and they should pretty much at a very basic level, no, I don't expect them to have everything memorized, but they should know at a very basic level general expectations for them as an employee, just like everyone else in the company.
Great. That was our final question for today. If you have any others, you can email me, or Shannon's email is up on the screen now. I know some of you had trouble seeing the slides today, but don't worry, you will receive a copy of the slides and a recording of this session with the slides in your inbox tomorrow. You will also receive your CCB CEU, and as Shannon said, we'll also be getting you a sample document of an executive charter that you can use at your organization as a starting point. So be on the lookout for all those emails coming from Kirkpatrick Price. Thank you so much, Shannon, for a great presentation.
Oh, thank you, guys. I hope it was valuable to you. And remember that that charter may come a day or two later than everything else. So keep your eyes open for it.
Yes. Have a great day, everyone.